a Fire podcast. I'm John, and this is Devin, and we are by a fire, the fire of politics as we know
Well,
it in our country.
the fire seems mildly doused, at least in the Middle East, where flash floods. 14 have died in the past 24 hours from flash floods occurring in Palestine.
Yeah, there's a bunch of floods up here in Oregon too.
Mm.
It's been pretty rough. But I wanted to start off this episode with this clip that I found. I'm not sure when this was from, but I think it's from a little while back. But like, it just struck me as completely crazy that this sort of has come true.
Mm.
And so I'm gonna share you this video because I think it's a good place to start.
Okay.
It's Ollie G.
Ah,
There
yes.
we go.
The dictator. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So so yeah,
Yes.
that was
Sacha Baron Cohen's great monologue from his modernized remake of the Charlie Chaplin classic, The Great Dictator. Yeah,
but like
both
pretty
of
much I mean the scary thing about that is like when he gave that speech, right? Like all of the things that he was saying were kind of like tongue in cheek true at the time.
mhm.
But since then, I feel like as a country, we've totally leaned into that whole. All of those things are worse now.
Yeah. I mean, the news line
That's
that
just
really struck
crazy.
me this week is that DHS, Border Patrol, ICE, is pulling people out of line and detaining them as they're getting ready to give their oaths of citizenship and allegiance. The final process of being naturalized as a U.S. citizen is, to take your pledge to the United States, and they are literally grabbing people mid-pledge and detaining them. And of course, we are learning horrific details.
Wait, you're saying wait a minute. You're telling me that people who are actually who've gone through the legal process to gain citizenship,
And they're
who
having their
are
naturalization ceremony,
they're literally like they're in front of the flag saying the pledge of allegiance or whatever they do.
and they're getting grabbed and detained.
What? Wait,
Yeah.
I haven't heard of this.
Hmm.
Wait, what?
Okay, let me
Okay,
get a
so
citation up. Uh,
news. Okay, so people, immigrants being grabbed during naturalization
yes,
ceremony by
people.com,
ICE.
Bailey Richards. USCIS is halting all applicants for immigrants from 19 countries. Immigrants lined up to become United States citizens in Boston on December 4th were pulled out of line by ICE officials moments before they were going to take their oath to be naturalized
Whoa.
at Faneuil
As people
Hall.
who were already approved to be naturalized, having completed the lengthy U.S. citizenship process,
Yeah.
lined up to pledge allegiance,
People from
U.S. Citizenship
Haiti,
and Immigration
Venezuela,
Services
Cuba.
officials told them they could not continue due to their countries of origin. What
Yeah.
were the countries of origin that they targeted?
Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela,
It says
Laos.
largely African and Asian countries.
Well, a
Laos.
total of 19. Okay, here's the full list: Haiti, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela.
So Venezuela being a country we might be about to go to war with, I'm not saying I agree with this at all, but like that's one where you could go, okay, well, maybe they're afraid of if we go to war, then some people get mad, kind of like with the Japanese during World War II, they put them in camps and stuff like that. But like, that's still not cool with me, but at least it kind of makes sense. But I mean, Laos, the
Yeah.
heck? Like, what's the fear there? I mean, some of these other countries are probably like, okay, maybe they're worried about Islamic people or something, which again, not okay with that.
Mhm.
But do we
Laos
know
is a
what it is about these
southeast
particular countries that they're
Laos
worried?
is a Southeast Asian country. It's a sort of mild. It's like Vietnam. It's mildly communist. By which I mean it's ostensibly communist, but much like Vietnam or China, how much you can really call it communism in practice is extremely debatable. But like, yeah, Equatorial Guinea, Togo. What the heck is our problem with Togo? That's a West African country. Uh,
It says that
you know,
officials argue that some of these countries lack reliable identity documentation systems or sufficient cooperation on vetting and information sharing, making it harder for U.S. authorities to properly screen entrants, which you would think they would have figured that out long before they were in line to get naturalized.
hmm
Um, I mean, but I suppose they're worried that the process had been weak and they're trying to shore it up. And then people that got through, I don't know, is it just a pause that I mean, they're basically like, well, we're not going to let you do this today. We have to vet you further or what?
Well, it's been canceled. Yeah, and yeah, they've been told that their naturalizations have been canceled, so it's now being litigated. I mean, they were at the last step. Their applications have been halted by Customs and Immigration Services, and it's now the subject of litigation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like I mean, they're not just detaining them and putting them into camps and deporting them. They're basically like, you can't do this right now. And then they got pulled out of line.
Mhm. And then there's the story of Jeffrey Wade and Se Jun
Hmm.
Park. Jeffrey Wade was born in Jamaica. His family moved to America long ago. He's an Army veteran who has lived in the country for 52 years.
Jeez.
Uh, and basically, yeah, he's a decorated Army veteran who was pulled over at a traffic stop, and then he's being put into custody by ICE and yeah, deported to
This is a U.S.
Jamaica.
citizen they're doing that to?
Well, he tried to become a United States
But he
citizen.
was in the U.S. Army.
Yeah, he's a military
How
veteran.
can you be a military veteran but not a citizen?
Oh, so yeah,
I didn't even
this
know
is a
that was a
horrible.
thing.
No, actually,
Like, I feel like
it's
if
a
you serve in the military and you like
nope.
to
You
go
don't
through and
get
you're actually a
automatic
veteran,
citizenship.
you
Nope,
should be. I mean,
nope. You don't get automatic citizenship for serving the United States government in the military. It has long been a contention point,
mm,
especially because, well, they're all dead now, but the Filipino scouts who fought and
yeah.
helped to rescue U.S. prisoners during World War II, during the Japanese occupation of Japan, and yeah, and more recently, of course, people who were translators in Afghanistan and Iraq,
Hmm.
and despite basically helping out the United States, it yeah, helping out a U.S. soldier or serving in the U.S. military does not have any statutory effect on your citizenship status of citizenship, and so we
Hmm.
have two uh, decorated military veterans who are being held in detention. Say June Park of California and Jeffrey Wade of Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's lame. Okay, so I'm reading here that well, it says the USCIS has determined that the burden of processing delays that will fall on some applicants is necessary and appropriate in this instance when weighed against the agency's obligation to protect and preserve national security. So they're basically saying that it sounds like that they are basically delaying their applications to do further background checks, which is, I mean, it's lame to have that get sprung on you at the last minute, but I mean, I think the headlines make it sound possibly worse than it was, as headlines are wont to do. Um, let's talk about some AI news.
Mm.
So you might have heard that Trump has recently sought to essentially preempt or invalidate state AI safety rules,
Hmm.
where states like Colorado and California had passed laws requiring transparency on AI, like bias prevention or consumer protections and things like that. And so, but if the federal government successfully preempts or invalidates those restrictions,
Well,
then the
that's
states could be
extremely
blocked from
dubious.
enforcing them.
Well, that's so ridiculous. This is one of those classic. This is a real balance of powers conflict thing. Is that you can't just prevent a state from passing a law with executive orders. Federalism doesn't work that way.
Well, I don't know what the grounds are that they would say. I mean, if
Well,
they're
that's
saying
the
it's a
thing is that
freedom of
it's
speech thing, like I don't know
well,
how
it's
that
it's
works. You know
yeah.
what I
Well,
mean?
it's
Like,
it's very
is the AI the new press, right? Because like it generates text. So if you're saying, well, it has to generate text in this one particular way, isn't that the government limiting free speech?
Mhm.
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate
Well,
question
you
that, like,
see
why
that
is
that's
AI
getting us to
special?
a very very deep and dangerous question and precedent, which is uh, do things which are not persons have a right to free speech?
Well, a
You
press
know,
isn't a
is
person.
yeah, but a well, but the press is ultimately human individuals and persons. You know,
Well, yeah, I mean, and human
this is
individuals and persons made
this
the
is a
AIs
question
and trained
of
them on.
extending rights to inorganic objects and programs. You know,
Well, I mean, what just because it's a neural network and not just some automated thing that generates text. Like if let's say I wrote a computer program that just picks random words at random, completely random, but I programmed in all those words and gave it all of its input and I created it as like a work of art or something. I mean,
well,
I feel like,
basically, so the way this executive order is, it will withhold federal funds for states that attempt to create AI regulations. And so basically, the FCC will. It's basically giving another pretext for Trump to withhold FCC, internet funds, Department of Transportation funds, education funds to states that attempt to regulate AI.
and so, but it gets pretty hairy though because so like I just because it's the topic of AI, I asked Chat GPT, what's the worst case outcome from if this happened, like if states can't enforce AI regulations,
Hmm.
and it's like pretty much consumer privacy, civil liberties, fairness protections.
Plagiarism,
Uh,
destruction of intellectual property rights. You know, uh, I mean, there's a lot of challenges by studios and the RIAA against these Chat GPTs, basically arguing that they're, basically developing themselves through massive piracy. Oh,
and
um,
so, but like if we But one of the other crazy thing that's happened is that you know there's this big competition going right between like OpenAI and Google,
Mhm.
and so OpenAI had this big push for GPT 5.2 called following from their internal Code Red event,
Mhm.
where that was they were basically like, okay, we got to buckle down and really get it in gear to compete with Gemini 3,
Mhm.
which is Google's one.
Mhm.
And apparently, this update um, includes a partnership, a $1 billion partnership with Disney for a tie-in with character rights for AI video generation.
Oh my God. So they're going
So
to
if
start
you thought Disney
generating.
slop was bad now,
Oh
just wait,
God.
just wait till you can go to Chat GPT and be like, generate me episode 12, or whatever.
Well, the more sinister thing about that is imagine kids now getting lured in with a sycophantic Winnie the Pooh or Mickey Mouse.
But you know
You
what
know,
they're going to do is they're going to make dolls because they already saw this. There's like, you can buy this doll. It's like a $1,200 Megatron transformer, and it actually transforms and
uh,
turns in from the tank into the robot, and it walks around and you can like talk to it and stuff.
but more importantly, it has a built-in app with a chat
But
GPT.
I don't know how the app on the Megatron one works. But you can
Yeah.
easily imagine, if you can put Alexa into like a little clock radio, why can't you put anything like that in, including cameras that can see your kids into a doll? Like the camera can actually see your
We
kid
are
and spy
now
on them and
so
listen to everything
close
you're
to
saying.
Megan and to the
Yes, we are.
bad remake of Chucky. You know, the one where Chucky is no longer possessed by a serial killer, but is instead a rampaging artificial intelligence. You probably didn't see that one. Uh,
Yeah,
it,
so
you didn't need to see that one, but my point stands.
I've seen Megan.
Yeah, yeah. Oh God.
Yeah, so think of all the content that Disney owns though.
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
they don't just own, Marvel and Star Wars and
Well,
all of
and
that.
that's another
They
thing is that
also own ESPN,
yeah.
right?
Well,
So
that's
think
another
about like,
thing.
oh, generate me, like if there's like, they have these like live replays
John,
of
let's talk about
penalties.
the
Oh, that they just
monopolization of
generate one where the
media.
penalty didn't happen and then that you think it did.
Yeah, they can gaslight us all with
Yeah.
AI edited deep fake footage. And but also scary is the current bidding war over Warner Brothers, with both Netflix and Paramount seeking to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. However, this goes, it means that there's going to be even less diversity in the media market. We're going from most of America's media and pop culture being owned by six businesses to most of media and pop culture being owned by about four businesses. So, at what point is it? I mean, it's already an oligopoly, but the oligopoly is tightening, and it is a disaster, especially for people, film lovers like myself, because just as we saw a massive drop off in MGM and 20th Century Fox movies, uh, it just means that there's going to be way less movies in the pipeline going into the future.
And the
Because,
movies that have been coming out, those ones are already
mhm,
pretty bad. Like, I
yeah,
mean, I don't know if you've seen much of the movies lately, but
the special effects, the CGI, and the compositing is absolutely terrible. And that's because the studios are no longer having to compete. You know, uh, special effects, acting, writing, the golden age of cinema is either argued as 1976 or 1999. I'm kind of a proponent of 1999 as the peak of
yeah.
American filmmaking. And, back then, because it was so heavily competitive, you had writing and special effects and music and cinematography that were all top notch. I mean, one of the things that, the example for 1999 is, have you ever seen The 13th Warrior? It was a huge flop in 1999 with Antonio Banderas, but
I think I might have seen it.
it's still a top flight medieval fantasy film. It's a retelling of Beowulf.
Yeah.
And the thing that struck me was like that and some of the other movies which were flops in 1999, but they were still absolutely tremendous, impeccable films. That's how good, things were in that year. um,
Well, back to
yeah.
modern events for the news. So let's go back to Israel and Hamas because we
Mhm.
talked about Israel Hamas a bunch
Mhm.
this year, and there was a Trump brokered ceasefire on it, and then there's been some skirmishes or violations here and there, but it looks like a bunch of hostages got turned over and remains got turned over, and there seems to be an ongoing commitment from both sides to stick to this truce.
Though, I mean, how long the truce will continue, the BBC is reporting. I mean, basically, Hamas is upset about the lack of food aid, the interruption of food aid, as there are all these people facing flooding, whereas the Israelis are kind of continuing on insisting on the return of certain dead bodies or certain hostages, which Hamas says that they just have uh no trace of them. They got
Mhm.
lost in the bombardment. One of this is this guy Ron Givili,
Right.
who was taken as a hostage, and basically Hamas has said like we just don't know. In the chaos of your attack and all of that. We don't know where he is anymore or what happened to him. We think he's dead.
Hmm. Yeah.
And Israel is basically saying that's an unacceptable answer. And yeah, so there's a whole, how well the ceasefire is going to hold up, you know, especially in the face of this sort of flood. So there's sort of a new urgent aid crisis in Palestine right now. So yeah, there's been less news, but it's still a tinderbox that could go off at any time. And
And
another part of
then,
it is
mhm.
another aspect of that is the Israeli government has approved 3,200 new housing units in the West Bank. So that's basically another 12,000 internationally illegal settlements,
Yeah.
which are going to be going through. So, oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, what's the latest on Venezuela? I heard that an oil tanker was seized, and there's
Yes,
been
this is.
legal challenges to some of the Trump administration's various strikes on different boats and stuff like that. So,
Mhm,
first of all, the oil tanker, that
mhm,
one caught me by surprise because, okay, the argument has been that striking these cocaine boats and stuff, well, they're carrying drugs. Well, of course, whether they were carrying drugs or not, I don't know how accurate that is. Let's say it's true. It's still an unprecedented move to use the military on those targets,
mhm.
and so, but why an oil tanker all of a sudden?
Well, I think one of the most interesting articles on this is by Tim McDonald, writing for Semaphore on December 11th. Um, he's basically talking about how this represents a new tactic or a new pitch in the energy wars. Something that's also been happening is
The
the
energy
Ukrainian.
wars. What is the energy wars?
Well, Russia is basically sustaining its war through illegal, by evading sanctions and illegally selling oil across the world. This is done by what's known as the Shadow Fleet, which is a network of dubiously legal international tankers which have basically been picking up and smuggling Russian petroleum to India, China, and various other countries in the third world. So this blockade and detention of a Venezuelan oil tanker it basically sets up a potential new tactic against states like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, which is that we're just going to seize their boats. You could say it's piracy, or you could say, well, it's actually more privateering. Um,
Well, okay, but
is
I mean, normally, uh, sovereign countries don't just take other boats from other countries. So clearly, the Trump administration is targeting Venezuela in particular,
Yeah.
right?
And actually,
And
you
supposedly,
know,
like they want regime change. I mean, it seems to me that it's a pressure to try to get regime change there,
they're looking for a casus
right?
belli. They're looking for they're looking for an incident, a shooting incident
So are
that
they
will
trying to
give them the just.
provoke? Are they basically doing this to try to provoke Venezuela to actually take some kind of first strike against us in some way? Like, well, maybe if
Or
we
just a
start taking their,
defensive reaction. All
yeah,
it takes is for one Venezuelan sailor on a Venezuelan vessel, or to fire a shot back in defense. All it
right.
takes, the other bit of news is that the United States did a 40-minute aerial intrusion over Venezuelan airspace. So
See, my
U.S.
worry
jets
is,
did an overflight over Venezuela.
see, my worry is, I think, I think if I'm Maduro, I would, I would have to realize that the U.S. might be flexing right now. But like if the US really wanted to go into Venezuela and do an actual, you know, assault on the
Mhm.
ground, troops on the ground type of thing and take out Maduro, they would have already done it.
Well, not necessarily. I
Well, here's
mean,
the thing. There's a reason. I think there's a reason that the US hasn't already done what they obviously are kind of tiptoeing around is that China is basically every time we're getting close to Venezuela with some ships or something, they just sail a bunch of boats around Taiwan and they're like, yeah, go ahead and take it, go ahead and invade
well, you
Venezuela
see,
and
that's
see
the
where that
thing is
gets
that
you. Because
okay,
we'll get tied up in Venezuela and
yes,
we can't fight China and
Venezuela
Venezuela at the same time.
Venezuela is a mountainous jungle country with a population of 30 million, kind of the size of Texas, so it's not necessarily a small country. I mean, it's smaller than the US, but it's still the size of a pretty large
Yeah.
state.
We don't have to
And
take over the whole thing though. I mean, but the thing to me is that right like I read that some internal documents were leaked from the U.S. government that basically said that we felt that if China decided to strike our navy with their hypersonic missiles, that we would just flat out lose.
yeah, yeah, there was the release of yeah, let me get that up. Uh,
Yeah, it was. This was
yeah, that's
basically Yahoo News
the
said this was
Independent New
December
York
9th.
Times. Yeah.
U.S. could burn through key missiles in a week if war with China erupts.
Hmm.
Um, the United States could burn through key long range missiles after roughly a week of conflict.
Hmm.
And the Eurasian Times said that the USA would lose every time without major reforms,
Hmm.
basically stating that unless it rapidly overhauls its military posture, the U.S. would just get its butt kicked.
Hmm.
China, I don't know
It's a
what the
real
basis of that is, but
Well, the basis of that is the number and the amount and the capacity of China's anti-ship missiles. Basically, it's a question of whether China's got a sufficient volume of anti-ship missiles, long-range anti-ship cruise missiles, that it can basically swarm and overwhelm the Suez flares and the other countermeasures of U.S. warships in a group. And so, essentially, a conflict in the Strait of Taiwan. I mean, we might, we are still able to win in blue water, but the question is whether we can win in the South China Seas, where the Chinese have a short range advantage and where they are building up a large amphibious invasion capacity. Um, and so that is kind of the challenge is whether U.S. anti-missile and anti-aircraft countermeasures are really up to a U.S. carrier group being able to take the volume of fire that would be coming from the Chinese coast. We would not have air superiority. That's one thing for sure. We might have on an individual basis, we might be able to outfly, but the Chinese Air Force is 5,000 aircraft. Basically a fight in the Straits of Taiwan in the South China Sea, China is going to have the home field advantage.
So, what if there's a diplomatic solution to all of this? Like, I've been thinking about this, right? Like, obviously, China had the communist revolution, but that was a while ago, and they've been experimenting with different, more democratic forms of reform. They've got the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, the CCP still has firm control
Well,
over
that's the
everything.
thing. That's the
But
thing is
like,
that
is there a middle ground of some kind, like a social democratic middle ground where the governments of Taiwan and China could agree to become some type of union?
well, the thing that killed that is what's happened to Hong Kong and what has happened to the special autonomous region of Hong Kong. Basically, the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese government have more than ever, gone against reuniting with China after seeing how the Communist Party of China dismantled democratic groups and democratic governments in Hong Kong after acquiring Hong Kong.
Okay,
So,
well, clearly, so okay, so but like the thing is,
or
right? Like,
also look at Tibet, look at Xinjiang. Uh, the worst human rights records of the areas under Chinese occupation
sure,
have been these areas that are ostensibly nominally semi-autonomous zones,
but like,
and
why
that's
are
where
they? I mean, I don't know too much about what's going on there. Like, what are they actually doing there? What
the
first of all, what's this area called exactly?
well,
The
okay, I'm
one in
referring
Tibet?
to well, there's Tibet. There's the Tibet Special Autonomous Region. Let me get that up. Uh, wow. Okay, so what's Tibet's current status? Yeah, the Tibet Autonomous Region, which is basically the status of Tibet ever since it was invaded and occupied in 1950. And
So
then,
so okay, it says this is just from the net. It says Tibetans face severe limits on speaking freely about politics or cultural identity. Public criticism of government policies, displays of Tibetan flags, and even celebrating the Dalai Lama's birthday can lead to arrest or punishment. Peaceful protests, such as recent opposition to mining projects, have resulted in arrests and communications blackouts imposed by authorities. Arbitrary detention and imprisonment of activists and religious figures, monks, yada yada. Monitoring groups and reports document hundreds and potentially thousands of Tibetans detained for political or religious reasons. Credible reports cite torture, beatings, ill treatment in detention facilities. Which, I mean, and whenever you criticize this stuff, China will just point to our prison system and say, you know, yeah, but like, but anyhow, international human rights observers and historical documentation indicate abuses ranging from severe beatings, possible deaths in custody, yada yada, cultural suppression, linguistic restriction, limited movement and surveillance,
it's a
suppression of
genocide,
expression.
John.
Yeah,
China, the PRC is in the process of committing two, three, even four genocides right
but
now.
okay. So
And
suppose
that's
that
another
you're the
thing.
leader of the free world, right? You're whoever the president of the U.S. is. Maybe it's Trump, maybe it's somebody else when this goes down.
Mhm.
But you know, could you not go to China the way that you went to uh, Israel and Hamas and be like, okay, guys, look, here's the list of things that y'all can't do anymore. It's like I read this thing that when now this is not to say Cortez is a good example of like how to be a diplomat.
Yeah,
But but
mass
Cortez, when he showed up to the
murdering
Aztecs,
conqueror.
he was like, "Okay, y'all can't eat people anymore. Like, no more cannibalism." And they were just like, "Okay, sure." And then they just kept eating people and
Well,
sacrificing people.
I think you're simplifying the whole collapse of the Aztec Triple
I'm not.
Alliance by
I'm
a
not.
vast
I'm
amount.
not trying to simplify it. I'm just saying that one of the attempts made was to be like, "Hey, can you guys not do this?" But the Spanish clearly didn't have the leverage that like the United States of America has in
Mhm.
dealing with China over Taiwan, right? Like, why can't we go to them and say, "Okay, here's all these things that you guys are doing that can't keep happening. If you stop doing this and you commit to have Taiwan treated in this other way and change these aspects about how you do things and don't repeat that, then there's a
Well,
possible world where there could be a united China, right?"
well, 2025 was an absolute disaster for U.S. soft power over China. And what I mean by that is that China just posted a record high trade deficit even after losing
Surplus.
200 billion, yeah,
Surplus.
trade surplus, even after posting a 200 billion. So the
Yeah, it was a
tariffs that we
trillion
have,
dollar trade surplus. Yeah.
China is benefiting. They're picking up all the trade that we're losing because of our tariffs. We have shot ourselves in the face. And previously, the biggest deterrent for Chinese military belligerence was the threat of losing trade with the United States. But now China is profiting in a world that the United States is withdrawing from. And the deterrence of losing U.S. trade is no longer, we've already popped the bubble, and China's like, we're okay with losing business with the United States. And so that was our biggest hook. That was our biggest deterrence. And now all we have got left is force, nuclear weapons.
Which is a big deterrent.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
mean, I mean, well, it kind of is. Of course, it's
Well, you see,
mutually
the thing
assured
is,
destruction is the problem.
yeah, but nobody's lived through. You know, at this point, we're getting to, by 2030,
But nobody
every
wants that. I
veteran
mean,
of World War II will be over
yeah.
100 years old.
Well, that's obviously a big risk that we always have is
Mhm.
people who experienced history and don't want to repeat it die, and then people that don't know history because they scroll TikTok all day since they were 2 years old, uh, are doomed to repeat it because they don't.
And well, that's coming up because, you know, after 1815, the resolution of the Napoleonic Wars, there were no real large wars in Europe until the Franco-Prussian War, 1870. And then 1870 to 1914, 44 years. And 1918 to 1939, 20 years. And then, we're
I'm not
basically,
big on these. Oh, this cycle happened a few times, like a handful of times in history. So now we're on that same cycle. Like, no, no, that's not statistically valid. It just isn't. I don't think
my
that
argument is
anything. I
that
think all bets are
wars
off,
happen.
honestly.
I think
Yeah, they
wars
do,
happen when, the living lose memory of what war is. And I
sure.
think that a lot of the world
And I think it
has been
also happens when
sufficiently
the
removed
government
from
realizes
war.
that's the only way to get rid of all the insane men between 18 and 30 that are committing 90% of the crime.
Mhm.
Like, like I've
Well,
often
that's the
thought that
other
like,
thing is that as our society, the world is aging, and as it ages, the rate of murders has been dropping off. Not
but this
just,
is a big problem that both our country and a country like China would have to consider if
it's
we're
called the gray
talking about a
wave.
war, which is that both of our countries don't have enough young people, and the young people we do have are reproducing at like record low rates.
Hmm.
And so if you have a war that goes big and you're losing 1 million of your young people,
Well, that's
like,
what's happening to Russia right now. Russia is
right. And
basically
that's,
destroying itself.
well, and so, this is the thing that I see, because to me, right, there's two versions of the future that we can go down, because we have free will. We can choose. And one future horrible things happen. There's a war. It's horrible.
Mhm.
Millions of people die. Nobody wants that. It's just not worth it. In another future, we have to change on all sides how we're doing things,
Mhm.
but we can do that. We can always upgrade our way that we operate, like we upgrade our operating system on our computer. We can go, okay, these are the things that it's how we did things in the past, and we had our reasons for doing it that way.
Mhm.
But we have to recognize that what got us to this point isn't what's going to get us to the next point.
Right.
We have to
What
evolve,
what
right?
you're
And
presenting is what's known in history as Whiggism.
Wig,
Whiggism, also known as, yes, WHIG, that's the Whiggish school. It's also known as Hegelianism. But it's basically the theory or the belief that human history is continuously progressing forward.
I'm not
You know.
saying there's a directionality to it.
Mhm.
I don't think forward or it's on a progress, but it's just it's just how life works. It's you go through things because there's certain pressures at certain times, and that's the only you have to do things a certain way, and you make your decisions at that time, and maybe you make some mistakes, and that's okay because everyone makes mistakes,
Yeah.
but you do things a certain way, and it's going to rub some people the wrong way, and some people are
Mhm.
going to disapprove of how you did things.
Mhm.
But at a later time, when it comes time to do the next thing, there might be people that don't want to do business with you or be on your team or whatever because of how you operated on a past project or in a past
Mhm.
thing. And you might
Yeah.
have to come to an agreement and say, look, I can acknowledge these things of how we did things in the past was not ideal. And
Mhm.
we've learned from that, and we don't want to do that again. Let's go forwards and make a commitment to do things in a better way. Because I think if you're China, if you're in that position of power, you can afford to do things not the way you did it when you weren't in that position, right? Because when you
Mhm.
weren't in that position, maybe you were a little desperate. Maybe you did things in a way that was the most expedient at the time. But now you're at this other position, and if you want to move forwards without conflict, because what's the cost of a war? Like it's insane. It's
Mhm.
not worth it. It's much better if China was to set the example of how you can evolve as a country and move past the kinds of things that we see that we're just talking about. I mean, they would set the stage to demonstrate to the world like how things should be and how they're a leader on things, and that could
Mhm.
influence a lot of how other countries do things. Because all the other countries in the world look at how U.S. and China do things, and they
Mhm.
follow that.
Yeah. But we also have to understand Taiwan and China within the historiography and the historical settings of China and the narratives of China. And what I mean by that is that Taiwan, before it was the last bastion of the KMT, the Kuomintang, it was the last bastion of the Ming Dynasty as the Qing Empire expanded, and then eventually the Qing in the late 17th century were able to conquer Taiwan. So, you know, basically there is, to a certain ideology, the Chinese Revolution isn't complete until the KMT is no more. Basically, as long as Taiwan is an independent country under the rulership, or that has the presence of the Kuomintang Party, uh, the Chinese Civil War, it's been in a state of ceasefire for the past 75 years, but there's still that alternative. There's still that rival, and so that's an aspect of the CCP, is that they have a totalitarian mindset, and basically Taiwan is the last refuge of their enemy, of their opposition.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, this is clearly. I mean, you wanted to talk about Hegelianism. This is clearly an internal contradiction. The
mm,
contradiction of the way Taiwan is and the way China is, and if there's to be a synthesis, like you kind of have to transcend those differences in some way, and maybe that does involve some kind of a progress or that Whiggist recognition of the things that were done in the past that we can now look back on and say, and maybe that are even being done right now, that we
Mhm.
can look at and say, well, okay, these are things that we could do differently, that we don't have to try to control that much. Like I think there's a tendency that we have as humans, like sometimes, to be overly controlling, because there's a fear that if you let people have their own ideas and dissent, and you get chaos, and then you get an erosion of state identity, or an erosion of control. Basically,
Mhm.
you risk like an uprising or different things of that nature, possibly. But I think that once a state gets to a certain point of power, you don't have to worry about that as much. Like, you have to be able to have the freedom to let people have their disagreements, have more freedoms, because it actually ultimately enhances state power if
Mhm.
giving people that freedom also allows them to be happier and contribute more to society.
Yeah,
And
but the
then you
counterpoint
can have
I'll
good ideas that can come from those disagreements, because sometimes people are right.
yeah, but a counterpoint that I'll present is that, let us say that there was some sort of union achieved between China and Taiwan.
Hmm.
Taiwan is, it's got a population of 23, 24 million people. You know,
That's it.
yes, that's it.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
thought they had more.
Uh,
Oh,
yeah, well, no, no,
that's
no.
still a lot of people, but
It's still a lot of people. I mean, but my point is that they go from being an independent nation of 23, 24 million people to being a province in a country that has a population of 1.4 billion. That's to
right.
say that even if, just the sheer
Yeah.
numbers,
Yeah, it's
you
like,
know,
oh, it's like Delaware, or Rhode Island. Like, do they really have much state power, compared to,
right,
I mean,
right.
but
That's the thing, is that Taiwan would go from being an independent nation to being the Rhode Island of China. And so just
yeah.
by sheer demographics, by sheer numbers,
Yeah,
um,
I don't know what the consequences of that would be, but one would have to think that if you're Taiwan, you look at it and go, well, there's a lot that would then not be in our hands anymore, potentially. I mean, I don't know,
mhm.
economic revenue or things of that nature that they presently probably get all of. I mean, they don't have to
And
revenue share
also
with
just
China right now,
remember
right?
that Taiwan was settled by the KMT and by the refugees. A good half of the population of Taiwan are people who were refugees from the Chinese Civil War. These
Sure.
are and refugees from the Cultural Revolution, from the Great Leap Forward, from the famines and the purges of Mao Zedong. So Taiwan is inhabited by the grandchildren of the people that were the most hardcore opposition to Mao and to the Chinese Communist Party.
Hmm.
They're the people that remember when the temples were burned. Um, so that's
Right.
another part of it, is that the
Yeah,
internal
there's a lot of
contradiction.
bad blood there.
A lot of bad blood. Yeah,
Um,
decades of conflict.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's much like Israel and Palestine. It's not a conflict that is easily resolved. It is a conflict that
Well, perhaps it's
echoes.
not that. I mean, I think you're talking about thousands of years versus like maybe like
But
150 or something.
but my point about the Qing and the
But
Ming dynasty, and also the history of Taiwan in general, is that this has not been the first time that Taiwan has been a conflict zone.
uh-huh.
The Sino-Japanese War was fought over Taiwan. That was in 1890 between Japan and China. That was the first war that Japan and China fought, which ended up with Japan, taking control of Taiwan. And before that, like I said, it was sort of the last redoubt of the remnants of the Ming Empire. And before that, there was Dutch, Portuguese. It's been a pirate haven. The natives of Taiwan are, sort of a blend of a little bit of Filipino, Chinese, Malayan. So they don't necessarily consider themselves Han Chinese
Hmm.
like mainland Chinese do, even if they are largely Chinese in culture at this point. But that's because, like I said, half of the island is people who fled from the Chinese Civil War. So, uh, you know, it's been a conflict zone before. It's been a conflict zone between China and Japan. It's been a conflict zone between warring dynasties of
Yeah,
China.
like, yeah, there's a long history of conflict in many places, but I mean, we have to be able to have a vision of how things could be and then find a way to get buy-in from both sides on that vision so that the world can move forwards without having a nuclear freaking war
Right.
and millions of people dying, because that's not going to help anybody. And you know, yeah, it's complicated, but it's certainly one can understand the perspectives on the different sides. I mean, uh, China feels like, hey, Taiwan was supposed to come back to us at the end of World War II because the Japanese had taken it. That's part of what we get. And well, it did, but then they had their civil war and the factions split. And so the U.S. comes in and is like, well, you know what? As long as you guys don't fight over it, we'll say there's one China, sure, wink, wink,
Well, okay,
but
the history of that is also another thing. That was what Nixon's visit to China was about. It was a
yeah,
huge pivot where we went from recognizing Taiwan as the Republic of China to
right.
basically we now don't really recognize Taiwan, or we try to kind of downplay the existence of Taiwan as much as possible. There was one little advertising. Here it is. Rise of the White Sun. It's a game that I've kind of got on my wish list. It's
Hmm.
a game that is about the warlord period of China. So basically going from 1912 to 1939, and with a whole bunch of different factions. So that's one thing that I've been looking at, and people that are interested in getting a deeper historical read. I often, as a historian, I'm an argument that some games can be useful towards building your understanding of history better than some books. But you have to pick the right games for that purpose.
Yeah,
But
well, there's nothing like actually commanding the units in historical battles and really getting to know the landscape and the geography. Because if you don't, your troops die and things like that. I think
yeah,
I think you're right that some people learn certainly better that way than just reading a book. Although
that's
I think
what
multiple
why
angles of it is always best.
that's why James Holland, for example, the World War II historian, argues that an important part of being a historian is actually walking the land. Like
Yeah.
walking on Normandy Beach and actually experiencing, or Omaha, Utah Beach,
Yep.
and actually experiencing what the terrain itself is like.
I mean, this is why whenever I would read philosophers like Nietzsche or guys like that, whoever it be, I always try to read as much as possible as I can about their lives, what their
Hmm.
lives were like outside of what they wrote. Because I think understanding the context of someone's life, and it always gives you a lot more perspective and insight into why they had a particular bent in their writing. And
Right.
I think sometimes people who don't do that, they're actually projecting a lot of their own sort of steel manning of the person who wrote it intellectually, whereas it might not be that highfalutin. It might be that they were just mad because somebody wouldn't have sex with them or something. Like
Or well, they were
there's a
all
lot of
existing within their own particular
yeah,
area of media and media conversation and discussions and topics that
sure.
were circulating. That's why I find the history of ideas, that particular subschool of history and historical inquiry, to be so fascinating. um,
So let's talk about one more topic. Um, I guess, in terms of what are the current news events that were going on. Um, you mentioned the new national security strategy that's antagonistic towards Europe and NATO, and we talked about the Ukraine or the Venezuelan oil tanker being seized, which seems to be kind of a part of that in a way. It's sort of
mhm.
the U.S. we're gonna be our own like NATO of the American continents or something. Like not
Well,
necessarily our whole hemisphere, but this side of the planet that has North America and South America on it is going to be under our power.
yeah, it's basically a
And we're less
major
concerned
shift.
about Europe. We're less concerned about whatever's going on over there because, Trump is just criticizing Europe as like they're letting in all these immigrants and it's becoming not Europe anymore and yada, 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 which,
Yeah, he's
it's
repeating a
more of
lot of
this.
racist far right propaganda about
I don't
Europe. And
necessarily, I think there's definitely a racist element in there, but I looked into this a little bit and I found it to be very interesting that there are some situations that were going on in places, and it's not necessarily race based. I mean, it's like I read this article or it was like a video documentary actually on Ireland, and there's like these little Irish villages where they've picked an old dilapidated hotel or something that's not even fully functional as a building. Like it doesn't
mhm,
necessarily even have heating in all the rooms, or the water doesn't, the toilets don't work, or things like that. And they'll just bring in like 1,000 Ukrainian refugees and just dump them in there, even though the locality doesn't even have school schools or hospitals or
mhm,
clinics and things like that enough to deal with this population of people. They're just bringing all these refugees and putting them in there. And they're white people. They're not, it's not a
mhm.
racial thing, but it's just that the amount of immigrants that they're dumping in some of these communities is so much that the national government puts them in there and the locals are just like, what are you guys doing? Like, we didn't approve of this. How can you even do that? Um, and it's, I think, obviously in some countries, in some areas where they've had so many immigrants of different religions and nationalities, it's caused a lot of conflict because you got a lot of people that think very differently, talk differently, look differently, and living in what would historically have been a very homogenous area, and they're just not used to. I mean, obviously in America, that's just America, right? we just don't think it's a big deal here, but I just, I think in some of these cases though, it's not an unfounded issue. Like there is a problem of too much immigration in some of these countries.
Well, I mean, a part of it, another thing that, this is Defense One is reporting on this new national security strategy. They received a link of the unclassified, which includes the whole proposal that Trump wants to make a group called the C5 or the Core Five, consisting of U.S., China, Russia, India, and Japan,
Hmm.
as a rival and as a counterpart to the G7. And also, it talks about having the CIA and having the U.S. government work on getting. Well, basically, they identified four countries: Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland as being the likeliest targets for successful campaigns to leave the European Union and leave NATO. So that's a
Why would those
huge.
countries leave? Is it the U.S. trying to get them to leave?
That's basically, yeah, part of what Defense One is declassified is that
What?
basically the US Department of State and the US intelligence agencies are receiving, you know, uh,
Is this to
direction
appease Putin? Like, do you think that
to,
they're,
in,
do you think
yes,
Russia's like, hey, you guys need to like get some of
oh,
these Eastern countries that are closer to us that we never wanted to be part of NATO to not be part of NATO? Why not just
Putin,
let Russia into NATO?
Poland, okay, if we
I mean, they
allowed,
said they applied to be in it at one point, and like my understanding was they applied to be in
well,
it, and they were said, well, you had to do a
actually,
referendum, and then they were like, we're not going to do that. You have to just let us in, and they were like, no, you have to go through the same process as everybody else, and they were like, see, they won't let us in.
if Russia was allowed to join NATO at this point, they would be able to use the Articles of NATO to force the rest of us to invade Ukraine. Like
Well,
right now,
what if we let in Russia on the terms that Ukraine and Russia both get to come in and they can't have a war anymore?
That's a very interesting question. The case study would be how we successfully defused the tensions of the Cypriot War between Greece and Turkey. So there
Wait, there's a
is,
war between Greece and Turkey right now?
well, there was a war. There's
When?
still a in the 1970s.
That was like 50 years
1970.
ago.
Well, yes, but that was a war between two countries that were both NATO at the time.
Okay.
It was probably one of the greatest challenges to the internal coherency
Okay. Well, we
of, and
fixed it,
argue,
obviously, and it's not, didn't keep happening, right?
yeah, I mean, there's still a whole demilitarized zone in the middle of Cyprus that nobody is allowed to go to.
Nobody?
Well, they're demilitarized zones. So there's an entire like band of
Doesn't that
like,
just mean that the military can't go there?
well, it means that there's like a UN enforced no-go zone. There's a strip of land in Cyprus separating the Turkish and the Greek Cyprus.
The zone,
Uh,
also known as the Green Line,
mhm. Yeah.
or the Attila Line,
Yeah.
cuts through the center of Nicosia, separating the city into southern and northern sections. So there's a
Mhm.
city in the zone.
Yeah. Traditionally one of the largest in.
Nicosia remains the last divided capital in Europe.
Yep.
Some 10,000 people live in several villages and work on farms located within the zone, so it's not totally uninhabited.
Okay.
The village of Pila is famous for being one of the few remaining villages in Cyprus where Greek and Turkish Cypriots still live side by side.
Hmm.
Other villages, so basically they have Cyprus divided into a Greek and a Turkish side.
Hmm.
So it's like racially segregated, basically.
Hmm. Ethnically segregated. Yeah.
Kind of like India and Pakistan almost.
Yeah. Well,
A
I
little bit.
mean, you know, the Turkish government committed a considerable genocide against Ionian Greeks after the failure of the Greco-Turkish War.
Mm.
And so, millions of Greeks died in the 1920s as
You
there
talk
was an
about
ethnic
two groups that have
cleansing.
been fighting for thousands of years.
Yes. Well,
I
not
mean, that's
thousands of years. The Turks didn't really arrive on in Europe until the 11th century, but centuries, yes, centuries.
but where
Uh,
were they before that?
Well, the earliest known origin of the Turks is as the Gok Turks. They began as a Central Asian people.
I
They
see.
migrated down to
So
Iran as the
they're not the
Seljuks.
same ethnicity as like the Persians that the Greeks were at war with. They're just coming in from the same area of land that the Greeks fought.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah. Well, I'm just
they,
saying there's been people coming from that direction fighting with the Greeks for forever. Like
yes, there have been. Yes,
they
yes,
they've had bad luck with their neighbors, it seems. I don't know if
yeah.
it's because if the people are different now, maybe it's the Greeks that are the common thread there. Maybe they're the ones that really just antagonize people. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
I mean, they
the
did steal
Trojan
Helen of Troy,
Wars.
right?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's all about the conflict between Achaean Greeks and the Anatolian Luwite people. The people of Ilium are generally believed to be related to the Phrygians. And likewise, it's kind of believed that the Armenians are the descendants of Phrygian colonists. So, and of course, the whole question is where the relation is between Hittites and Lydians and Hittites and Phrygians, and where is the kind of commonality between those people and the Armenians and the Georgians. But that's one thing is that the Azeri are distinguished from the Armenians partly because the Azeri are considered a Turkish or
This
kind
has
of a.
been one thing that we can end on, but I've always wondered this that like if I could go back in time and see a picture or like actually meet Helen of Troy, I want to know what all the fuss was about. Like
Oh,
how hot was she actually
this reminds me. Oh God,
that like they would actually go to this lengths of this
I
war
I
because
I
she,
I I
like I mean,
I
Thrill.
worked it out, and I can just remember it. I'd have to find the exact citation, but I figured out, a Helen and a Millie Helen.
What?
Because we,
Millie
okay,
Helen?
well, Thucydides, it is History of the Peloponnesian War,
Uh huh.
gives us the cost of hiring and outfitting a trireme in the time
Okay.
of the wars between Athens and Sparta. Now, of
Okay.
course, we have to adjust for inflation, and so we have to have a retroactive inflation. But you can basically use that so to extrapolate the cost of 1,000, triremes, right? Like
Okay.
we have a basis in history
Sure.
for what a fleet of 1,000 triremes would cost, which is
Okay. Where
Helen's
are you
beauty
going with
was
this?
enough to launch.
What does that have to do
Uh,
with Helen of Troy?
a Helen as an economic unit is roughly $42 billion. So you can basically measure modern like stars like Sydney Sweeney or whatever in terms of values of millihelen.
I
So
don't
like
understand what you're saying.
we can have Helen. Okay, Helen is a measure of beauty. The beauty of Helen of Troy was enough to launch 1,000 ships. We can adjust this for inflation,
Uh huh.
and we can create it as an economic measure of value that we
Well, I
can
don't think it
then
was
kind of
just
turn
Helen of
into.
Troy that subsumed the whole entire value of the entire thing.
Yeah,
You
but
know what I
I'm
mean?
saying
Like
is that,
I think that
but we
it
can
was she
rate
was
beauty
enough to
in
push it over the
millihelens
limit
or
because there was
centihelens.
also a lot of
Or
value just in
theoretically, there could
occupying
even be
Troy's
such a thing
territory.
as a kilohelen or a megahelen, which would be,
Well,
like.
I asked ChatGPT to generate a picture of what
Okay,
Helen
can
would
you
have looked
share
like
Chat GPT's
to
prediction?
yeah, this is what ChatGPT says.
Please share it.
Um, Let me see if I can pull this up here. What
Is it a
Helen would have looked
42
like
billion?
if if she was hot enough to justify the Trojan War. Uh, and let's take a look at what ChatGPT says.
Okay, so
Yep.
that is what Chat GPT thinks is worth launching 1,000 ships over.
I
Okay,
mean, you can
okay.
understand at this point, right?
I see that Chat GPT is deeply influenced by that great poet Sir Mix-a-Lot. Chat GPT,
ChatGPT is a man of taste, apparently.
yeah, likes big butts and he
So,
cannot lie. Okay.
I mean,
Okay, well, so that concludes it. We start off with the Middle Eastern conflict, and we end up on a pretty thick Helen of Troy. That's so
this has
yeah.
been By a Fire. Well, let's go off into the night now with that.
With that vision of
Yeah, I need
Grecian
a
beauty.
cigarette now.